नमः सभाये पञ्चमदिनस्य चतुर्थसत्रे वयं सर्वे स्मः। सर्वेभ्यः स्वागतं। प्रातः वयं आर् यशोदा महोदयायाः भाषणं व्याख्यानं श्रुतवन्तः। अस्मिन् सत्रेपि तेषां व्याख्यानं वर्तते। एक्सपेरिमेंटल मेथड्स इत्यस्मिन् विषये महोदयानां व्याख्यानं वर्तते। वयं सर्वे सिद्धाः भवामः। महोदयानां कृते पुनरेकवारं स्वागतं। मञ्चम् अलङ्कुर्वन्तु शीघ्रं। धन्यवादः। करतालनेन स्वागतम्।
Coordinator of this program, Professor Venkatraoji, Head of the Department, other faculty members, research scholars and dear students, very good afternoon to one and all. Now, the topic for discussion in this session is experimental research. You might have studied about different methods of research like descriptive research, correlational research, causal comparative studies, explanatory, exploratory researches. Today we are going to discuss the experimental research. This is nothing but cause and effect. It is the investigation between the cause and effect relationship. So, what is the necessity to find out the cause and effect relationship, particularly in the field of education as a researcher? Is there any requirement as a researcher in the field of education? In continuation to that morning session, morning we have discussed about different types of research. In continuation to that session, research is the continuous process of a teacher in the classroom at any level, because always teacher aims at improving the situation, existing situation, in terms of students learning, in terms of tests or examination and evaluation system, in terms of developing the behavior of the students. So in that case, to find out the cause and effect relationship, to identify the factors that influence the students' performance in different fields is one of the main purposes of a teacher, aims of a teacher. So therefore, let us see how to study this cause and effect relationship. That is experimental research. Basically, what is this? What is this experimental method? Am I audible? It is testing a hypothesis. If X, then Y. In mathematics, at school level, we will be proving number of theorems to just mention a theorem. If a perpendicular is drawn from the center of the circle to its chord, it bisects the chord. Suppose that is a statement. In any mathematical theorem or statement, you will find two parts. One is given part and the other one is to be proved, right? If a perpendicular is drawn, then it bisects, right? Similarly, in experimental method, if x, then y. Okay? Means if you apply something, then there will be some effect. Okay? If you cause something, then there will be some effect of it. Right? So if and then relationship is studied following certain rules. We have different experimental designs. There will be discussing on what are all the different rules or different designs for conducting experiment. John Stuart Mill, he states that rule of method of difference is one of the appropriate basis for experimentation. What it states? If two situations, or if you can understand this statement, you will understand what is experiment, what is experimental method in education. If two situations are same or similar in every respect, and if some changes are made in first situation, and if that leads to modifications or changes in another situation, we can say that and in constant conditions, that is very, very important. Under constant conditions, except these two cases, all the remaining conditions should be constant. Then any difference that is observed in case 2 can be claimed due to the modifications or changes that are introduced in case 1. Right? To put it in very simple terms, a teacher in a classroom, in a traditional classroom, wanted to test the effect of programmed instruction on the learning of students or academic performance of students. So here, instead of traditional method of teaching, he is trying to add some new element in the form of teaching. That is what is called programmed instruction. Right? By adding this new element or by bringing some change in this phenomenon in the teaching learning process, he wishes to find whether any modifications or changes are observed in the academic performance of the students, right? So whatever the change that is observed in the students' academic performance because of application of or implementation of programmed instruction in classroom teaching, that can be attributed to this programmed instruction technique. So, changes incorporated in the situation X is cause and the difference that is observed in the situation Y is effect. And then, see, if you allow a student, during examinations, teachers conduct special classes or special study hours, right? Why do they do this? Anticipating that maybe these additional hours of study would help the students to achieve better, right? What is the cause that leads to this improvement in their academic performance? What is that we are expecting? Additional hours of study may lead to better academic achievement. So, one that is manipulated by the teacher is called here in this case dependent variable. The situation which automatically brings some changes because of changes in the or manipulations made by the investigator in the first situation is called dependent variable. Right? In simple terms, which influences the result is called independent variable, which is influenced by the other variable is called a dependent variable. In this case, which is independent variable and which is dependent variable? Number of hours of study and the academic performance of the student, academic achievement of the students. Which is dependent variable and which is independent variable? Right. Hours of study is a dependent variable. Program and instruction, academic achievement. Which is dependent and which is independent variable?
Academic achievement dependent variable.
Program and instruction is independent variable. This shows that experimental method is very easy to bring changes in the students, right? But always we cannot claim that whatever the difference or improvement that is observed in the second variable or dependent variable is because of the experimentation. Because in between the dependent variable and independent variable, there will be number of factors intervening between the dependent and independent variables and influencing the performance of the students, right? Say for example, of course we are allowing the students to study for more number of hours, unlike the previous days. But you cannot say that whatever the improvement that is observed in their academic achievement is because of more number of hours of study. Because the general interest of the student, motivation of the student, maybe his intelligence, maybe the supervisor who is really motivating the student to learn better, or support from the parents at home in the learning process. All these things may influence the academic performance of the student. Then, how to find out the effect of cause on the influence of cause on its effect, right? That is what is called experimental method. Experimental method is investigating the influence of cause on the one variable on the other variable. Alright? What is the basic nature of experimental research? It is to explain cause and effect relationship between variables is the main objective of experimentation. To quote Good, in experimentation, the investigator controls, also nothing but manipulates or changes certain independent variables and observes changes which take place in the dependent variables. Right? In other words, researcher manipulates research situation to explain cause and effect relationship, causal relationship between dependent and independent variables. So, in experimental method, there are two variables. Mainly, we have two variables because we try to find cause and effect relationship. Only two variables. One is dependent variable, independent variable. Finding relationship between these two is the main purpose of experimentation. But as I already told, though the researcher is interested about only these two variables, without his intention, some other variables also will be influencing the results of the experimentation. Those variables are called, what are those? Extraneous variables and intervening variables. What are the dependent variables? The conditions or characteristics that undergo change as a result of manipulation or control of independent variable in an experimentation. Okay. What is a dependent variable? What is a dependent variable? Which undergoes some change because of changes in the independent variable. That is dependent variable. Then what is independent variable? So here in this case, reward or punishment given by the teachers to the students. Definitely that affects their academic achievement. So reward or punishment and academic achievement. What is dependent, what is independent variable in this case? Either reward or punishment is dependent. Dependent. Why it is independent variable? Yes. If you are rewarding the student continuously, that improves his academic performance. If you start insulting the student continuously, punishing the student continuously, that leads to gradual in his performance. So therefore, which is influencing the other one? Reward or punishment is influencing the other variable, that is academic achievement. So, similarly, regular viewing of television programs may cause change in learning attitude. Nowadays there is a big hue and cry regarding the very ill effects of watching mobile videos or something on the students' attitudes or their value system, right? So, regular viewing of television programs and their attitude. Which is dependent variable and which is independent variable? Attitude is dependent variable. And watching television programs is independent variable. Then, though we are interested about only these two variables, dependent and independent, we are least bothered about any other variables, but still they play a major role in our results. Because ultimately at the end of the day we are very much bothered about results. But those results are influenced by other two variables, those are called extraneous and intervening variables. What are the extraneous variables? Factors which may have significant effect on the dependent variables. Not a simple effect, very significant effect on dependent variables. We may manipulate or control some extraneous variables, or we can minimize to some extent, whereas intervening variables cannot be manipulated by the investigator. Therefore, research should be very, very careful about eliminating or minimizing the effect of extraneous variable. Therefore, if we are able to eliminate or minimize the effect of extraneous variables, we will be in a position to find out the exact relationship between dependent and or cause and effect relationship. We will be able to arrive at the result. Next slide. Let us take the previous example. Studying the effect of program instruction on academic performance of the students, achievement of the students. As I have told, motivation, attitude, interest, all these things influence the intelligence of the student. Students in the control group and students in the experimental group may be of different intelligence levels. That may lead to some improvement or decrease in their performance. So, these are all the extraneous variables like intelligence, motivation, language comprehension. One who is good at language definitely perform better. So, all these things can be treated as extraneous variables. Next slide, please. So, what are the intervening variables? Which influence, the variables which influence the experiment but uncontrollable. See, in the case of intelligence, what we can say, what we can do? We can see that the intelligence levels of both control and experimental groups are same. That way we can nullify the effect of intelligence. on the result of the experiment. But intervening variables, it is not possible to control because the experimenter cannot anticipate. So, say for example, please go to the previous slide, please. See, dropout of a student. Teacher is conducting an experiment, suddenly 5 to 10 students are dropped out. What about the result of the experiment? Could you guess in the beginning itself that there will be some dropouts in your group, experimental or control group? No, you cannot do it. Similarly, technology hazards, natural calamities, all these are unavoidable circumstances in the experimentation, which is not in the hands of the researcher, and therefore he cannot control the situation, he cannot manipulate the situations. These are called intervening variables. So therefore, to find out, to investigate the exact relationship, whether there is cause and effect relationship between these two variables, the researcher should have very strong research design. What is a research design? What are its components? It comprises, it is a plan, it is a structure and strategy to conduct investigation so that the hypotheses are tested and valid conclusions are drawn. Why do we use research design? There are two major purposes of research design, functions of research design. One is to provide answers to research questions. The other one is to control variance, given by Curley. What is the hypothesis here in this case? There exists no significant relationship between the number of hours of study. There exists no significant influence of, there is no influence of or effect of programmed instruction on the academic performance of the students. This is a null hypothesis. Now you have to test whether that hypothesis is right or wrong. How do you test? You should have a strong experimental design. That design, when can you say that the design is very, very strong? Very valid? If you are able to minimize or nullify the effect of extraneous variables as much as possible in your design, so that you can arrive at valid results. Okay, please go to the next slide. So, therefore, the major thrust of experimental research design is to test hypotheses in controlled conditions. Unlike descriptive research, correlational research, explanatory research, or explorative research, experimental research is conducted under controlled conditions. Then how to proceed with a study by controlling the effect of extraneous independent variables is a major challenge. What is the criteria for a research design? How a research design should be? Whether the research design is suitable to answer a research question? Does the design help us to test the hypothesis? Does the design help us to control the extraneous variables which may affect our dependent variables? Can we generalize the results of our experimentation? If the answer is yes, yes, yes to all these questions, then you can say that your research design is very valid. Right? Excellent. So, first consideration while planning the research design. Your research process starts with formulation of objectives. Basing on that, formulating the research questions basing on that formulation of the research hypothesis. So, formulation of hypothesis should reflect the cause and effect relationship. Right? In majority of the cases, research scholars will be struggling to formulate a right type of hypothesis that should reflect your research question, which is based on your research objective. So that should be taken care of while planning your research results. And next one, methods of teaching and its interaction with contextual variables. Say for example, learner's family background, their mother tongue, or learner's achievement. All these things should be kept in mind while formulating the hypothesis. Means while planning your research design. Sometimes the researcher is interested not only to find out the cause and effect relationship between dependent and independent variables. Sometimes the researcher is interested to find out the combined effect, the interaction effect. What is the influence of learning method on the performance? That is one objective or hypothesis. What is the interactive effect of learning method and the parental educational background on the academic performance? There is also another possibility. So all these things should be taken care of while designing your, planning your research design. Next please, slide please. How to control the extraneous variables? There are different methods of controlling the extraneous variables. One is controlling the subjects. Subjects means the samples, right? How to control? In a laboratory situation, it is very easy to control because you can keep your temperature at the required level, right? Everything you can manage. But in education, we are dealing with individuals, human beings, right? Then how to control? See, if we suspect that the locality may influence or intervene in the results of the experimentation, what best we can do? We can see that only a particular, suppose rural students can be considered. In some cases, urban students can be considered. In some cases, see, most of the times, what is the limitation of experimentation? To avoid the influence or intervention of locality or intervention of the language, sometimes we need to balance the situation. Say for example, in the previous case I have mentioned about intelligence. What do? We conduct pre-test. Pre-test in the sense, before giving treatment to the students like control group and experimental groups, we conduct intelligence test. We group the students into average, above average and below average students, high IQ, moderate IQ, low IQ students. And we see that both the groups, control group and experimental groups, are having the students with similar levels of intelligence. So that's how we have to control the students. Matching the subjects. In psychology, usually, whenever we conduct research on the twins, it is very easy to match. We consider each player and we allot each individual to control group and the other one to the experimental group. So you are equating, balancing both the groups. That is what is called matching the subjects. Next, please. Randomization. What is randomization? Every individual or every subject in the population should be given equal opportunity to be selected to the control group or experimental group. So, we'll be discussing the types of research designs like pure experimental designs and quasi-experimental designs, where we go for randomized allocation of subjects to the groups. Means every student will be given, or every individual will be given equal opportunity while selecting or allocating to the two groups. Yes. Three principles are followed here. Select subjects at random. First thing, select subjects at random. Assign subjects to groups at random. Assign experimental treatments to groups at random. Means we have to, randomization principle should be applied for the subjects. Randomization should be applied even to the treatments. Suppose for control group, if we are giving treatment 1 in the first round, in the second round, for the control group, we will be giving treatment 2. Means experimental group will be given treatment 1 and treatment 2. Control group also will be given treatment 1 and treatment 2. Right? Next slide. Next slide. So, ANCOVA, analysis of covariance, is a statistical technique that also helps to control the effect of covariates on dependent variables. As we mentioned about the matching of the subjects, randomization of the subjects, and ANCOVA, this is a statistical technique. Okay, go to the next one. Next slide, please. Third criteria is generalizability. Whether the research situation truly represents the conditions for generalization. See, another way of randomization is you should select the sample from the population. Always from the population. To some extent, that will minimize the effect of extraneous variables on the dependent variable. Next slide, please. Next slide. What about the validity of experimental research design? When can you say that your research design is valid? Campbell and Stanley, they have given two criteria, major criteria. One is whether the research design is fit to answer the research question, that is your internal validity, and to what extent the findings can be generalized, that is about your external validity in experimental research. Next. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide, please. Next slide. What are the different steps in experimental research? Steps in experimental research. Identification of a research problem. Experimental method starts with selection of the problem. As we have discussed in the morning, which is of challenging type. It focuses on causal relationships of different variables, mostly from educational phenomena. The variables to be studied should be operational in terms. Usually in our thesis we mention the definitions of the variables involved in the study. What is the difference between definitions of the variables involved and the operational definitions of the variables? In our thesis we write operational definitions. Though we write operational definitions, most of the cases, in majority of the cases, they write according to Alport, attitude is defined as so and so, according to somebody else, attitude is defined as so and so. Is it an operational definition? No. So, the variable should be mentioned in operational terms, means number of people have defined a particular variable in different ways. How you are testing that variable in your research? What is the criteria that you consider for testing that variable? So that has to be mentioned. All these would help the investigator to convert the research questions into A research problem should be converted into a research hypothesis. Once you identify the problem, then you will be able to write the cause and effect relationship in the form of a hypothesis. Next slide. Next slide, please. How the hypothesis should be mentioned? How it should be stated? It should reflect the relationship between different variables. What are those variables? Right. They must be stated in such a way that they can be tested. Not only for experimental method, all your hypotheses should be stated in such a way, irrespective of the method of research, type of research. They should be stated in such a way that that can be tested. If you cannot test it, there is no meaning in formulation of the hypothesis. Next. One more thing, very, very important point. All your hypotheses must have their basis on theoretical analysis of the educational phenomenon. Because hypothesis is an intelligent guess basing on your own experience. Right? So next slide. Then selection of the suitable research design. What type of design should be selected? That should be selected for the investigation. That depends on the variables that you are studying, right? It includes the details of how the research objectives will be achieved and reached, how the problems encountered in research will be handled. See, basing on all these things, you should formulate the design. Next. What is a good design? When can you say it should be helpful to test the hypothesis? The internal validity of the study is directly associated with the nature of experimental design. The entire exercise concerning a successful experiment revolves around the suitability of the design. See, if you want to test the relationship between independent variables, if you adopt a crude experimental design will be influenced by extraneous variables very easily. So it is very difficult to exactly conclude that whatever the result that is observed is because of this treatment. So therefore, what is the variable that you are testing? According to, you have to plan your design. Next slide, please. Preparation for experimental treatments. If I say to see the effect of program instruction, to see ICT, effect of ICT on students' learning, to see the effect of short stories on the attitude of the students or value system of the students, how do you provide that treatment to the students so that you will be able to bring change in their attitude, you will be able to bring change in their value system? That treatment has to be designed, no? So, that should be taken care of. How do you develop that experimental treatments? Okay, suppose if I say ICT, what type of ICT tools you are designing for experimentation? Okay, instructional strategies you are planning for your experimentation. All these things should be planned in your research design. Next, please. Next slide, please. Selection and development of tools. Not only for this study, this method of experimental method, for any method of research, one should be very, very careful in selecting appropriate tools. For attitude, will you go for awareness scale? For assessing the attitudes of the students, would you design an awareness scale? No. Is it not? It is not fact-finding phenomenon, right? To study the attitudes of the students, you have to prepare a tool consisting of all the statements, which will be testing only the attitudes of the students, but not the facts. Okay, so all these things should be taken care of. Next slide, please. Selection of sample of subjects to be incorporated in experimental groups and control groups. Assigning these subjects to both experimental and control groups randomly as per the experimental design. If you adopt quasi-experimental design, how should be the allotment to the subjects to the control group and experimental group? If it is a pure experimental design, how to allocate the students to pure control and experimental groups? Okay, so accordingly, as per the design, we have to allocate the students. Next slide, please. What type of experimental design should I adopt? Should I go for pure experimental designs or quasi-experimental designs? To decide it, first you should put these questions to yourself. What are those? How the subjects are to be selected for my research? What is the procedure? Is it randomization? Should I go for randomization or non-random sampling? What will be the procedure of manipulation of experimental variable? How can I manipulate these extraneous variables in my experimentation? How to control the effect of extraneous independent variables? How the observations are to be made? What will be the most suitable statistical design for analysis and interpretation of data? Should I go for inferential statistics or should I go for descriptive statistics, parametric or non-parametric statistics? Similarly, what will be the scope of generalization of this study? Can I generalize the results obtained from this experimentation? Yes, if it is a pure research, we can generalize. Even quasi-research, we can generalize. But for crude experimental designs, we cannot generalize the results. So all these things should be taken care of. Next slide, please. So keeping in view the research questions, nature of variables, context of the study, resources and scope of the study, experimental designs are broadly classified into three categories. One is true experimental designs and the other one is quasi, the other one is crude experimental designs. Next slide, please. What are the true experimental designs? They are mostly used in experimental research in education because they seek control of extraneous variables with the help of random assignment of subjects. See, till now we have discussed that we need to minimize the effect of extraneous variables as much as possible so as to arrive at the exact valid relationship between cause and effect. That is what we have discussed. So therefore, in education, we have to adopt to the maximum extent the pure experimental research designs because then only we will be able to apply randomization. Right? Next. Observation of events with the help of administration of tests and quantification of data and replication of the study in a number of cases within the framework of experimental designs. These are all the procedures that we adopt in pure experimental designs. Next slide, please. Okay. See, in experimental designs, different authors use different abbreviations or symbols for treatment, control group, experimental group. Am I audible?
Yes.
Control group, experimental group, treatment, all these things. So, to avoid this confusion, let me give you my own presentation here. See, in true experimental, what are the true experimental designs? See, true experimental designs. The important component or characteristic of true experimental designs is randomization or random allotment of subjects to the control and experimental groups. Again, there are different types of designs. One is post-test only randomized groups. Randomized group design. Pre-test, post-test, randomized group design. Fourth one, Solomon. 4 group design. So these are all the true experimental designs commonly we use in education. What are the quasi-experimental designs?
Pre-test only.
Pre-test.
No randomization.
Single group design. Second one, rotation group design. Right? Let us discuss about these groups selecting examples. First one is only post-test randomized group design. The design itself clearly mentions its characteristics. There is only a post-test, no pre-test. Right? So, whenever we say a pure experimental design, definitely you should have an experimental group and a control group. Right? Experimental group and control. Because it is clearly mentioned there is a post-test, whenever we say that it is an experimental group, it will have treatment. It will undergo treatment. So, treatment is given to the experimental group. No treatment is provided to the control group. Right? Next, post-test. The design clearly mentions there is post-test is applied. So, both control and experimental groups are given post-test. This is the design. Post-test only because there is no pre-test. Before a treatment, there is no pre-test. So, post-test only, randomized group design. Now we have to explain what is this randomized group design. Why it is called randomized group design? Because the subjects are allocated to experimental and control groups randomly. That is why it is called randomized group design. What do you mean by random allocation of group subjects? What is meant by random allocation of subjects to these two groups? Experimental group and control group?
Selecting the subjects randomly.
What do you mean by that? Can you give me an example?
Equal chance to everyone.
Giving equal chance to, can you give me an example? Example for random allocation of subjects to experimental control groups?
Lot we can do. Lot.
That is one method. Other way, assigning all even numbered students and odd numbered students. Somehow you should select a procedure where you are giving equal opportunity to all the subjects in control group and all the subjects in experimental group. Right? Therefore, both the groups will be having similar levels of the basic performance levels of relating to that particular variable. The variable that we are testing will be same. Right? So now, find out the mean score of this post-test scores, consider it as M1. Mean score of this post-test group. Okay? Consider it as pre-test 2. Find out the difference between these two mean scores. Experimental group mean and control group mean. Find out the difference. If the difference between these two groups is significant, how do you find out the difference between these two groups? We apply t-test. If the mean difference is significant, what is the interpretation? If the mean difference is significant, significant means When the mean difference will be significant?
Statistic.
If the critical value is greater than the critical value, table value is less than the obtained value, calculated value, then we say that whatever the difference that is observed between these two groups is because of this experimentation, the additional manipulation that the investigator applied to experimental group, that is influencing that difference between these two groups. That is how we interpret. Is it clear? Okay? The difference between these two means, if it is significant, that means the obtained calculated value is greater than the tabled value, critical value. We say that this is because of the treatment given to the experimental group. Then what is the conclusion? The conclusion is, what is the hypothesis here? Null hypothesis in this case? There is no significant effect of maybe ICT learning on the academic achievement of students. Then what is the conclusion now? We reject the null hypothesis, stating that there is significant effect of ICT learning on the academic performance of the students. So this is about post-test only randomized group design. So what is the second design? Again, post-test only, but it is not randomized group design, matched group design. Okay, I have already given you an example. What is match? See, the design is same. Design will not change. Same design. But what is that you have to add here? Instead of random allocation of subjects to experimental and control groups, you should see that you are matching the subjects. How do you match? There are different methods of matching. You can take pairs, twins, and allocate each individual to experimental and control groups. Or you can find out the means, overall mean scores. Okay, and then you can allocate the subjects to experimental and control groups. So, but design will not change. Design is same. Is it clear? Clear? Okay. The next one is same procedure, same interpretation. The next one is the design itself explains everything. What is the procedure that a researcher follows in this design? Pre-test, post-test, randomized group design. Again, the design is same. It will not change. Right? Post-test, randomized group design is same. What is that we have to add? Pre-test we have to add to both experimental and control groups, right? Compared to the first design, I think second design is a better one. Am I right?
Yes.
Why? You are nullifying to some extent the extraneous effect of extraneous variables. Coming to the second design, third design is far better. Why? You are trying to balancing the previous knowledge. Right? How you are trying to balancing it? See, while interpreting, whatever the difference that, in the second case, whatever the difference that is observed between control and experimental groups may not be only because of the treatment. Sometimes maybe because of the previous knowledge. Basic difference in these two groups. So to nullify that effect, what is that we are doing? We are conducting pre-test and we are, what do we do now? Here, post-test mean we have calculated in the second case. In the third case, instead of taking post-test as it is, what we do? Post-test minus pre-test. You will get a mean score. Again in the control group, find out post-test minus pre-test. You will get a mean score. Now you compute the mean difference between experimental group and control group. Now, compared to the second design, you are able to give a better picture to the readers. regarding the relationship between dependent and or cause and effect relationship. So if the same application, same interpretation, if it is significant, we say that there is influence of treatment. We say otherwise there is no significant influence. So coming to the third even Solomon 4-group design also self-explanatory. What it says? Self-explanatory. 4-group design. So we should take, if it is a 2-group, we have taken 2 experimental groups, or if it is a 4, if it is 2-group, we have taken 1 experimental group, 1 control group. If it is 4 groups, very obviously we go for 2 experimental groups and 2 control groups. So take experimental group 1 and control group 1. Again take experimental group 2, control group 2. This is what Solomon mentions. Take 4 groups. See, what do we do here? Can anyone tell me? Is there any relationship between first design, second design and third design? Any interrelations, any connections? Can any one of you tell me? Any relationship between these 2 designs, or all these things are no, independent? Huh? See, experimental means we give treatment in both the cases. Treatment 1, treatment 2. Here we get post test 1. Here we get post test 2, post test 4. For a set of control and experimental groups, we don't go for pretest, right? For another set of experimental control groups, we go for right? From this, how do you compute the relationship between or the effect of or influence of experiment on the dependent variable? See, here no treatment here, right? Even if it is there, no treatment. In psychology, we have learned that there will be growth and development is a continuous process. Because of continuous growth and development, even without exposing the students to the experimentation, there will be some improvement, right? Here we have provided pretest to the students. Even sometimes pretest also influences the students' performance. Suppose you have appeared for net examination first time. After 6 months again you are appearing for net examination. Don't you think that the experience that you have gained by appearing first time would also help you in performing better in your second time appearing for the examination? So to nullify that effect, of pretest, in the previous case, to nullify the effect of general growth and treatment development, we have applied pretest. Here in this case, why this is little better than the previous 2 designs? To nullify the effect of pretest also on the experimentation or the dependent variable. Solomon has given 4-group design, right? Here there is no effect of pretest, but here there will be effect of pretest on the dependent variable. So if you read, in this case, gain in group 1. This gives you P1 minus P1 dash. Okay? Post test minus pre-test. Difference gives you gain in this group. Difference between these 2 groups gives you gain in group 3. right? If you subtract G1 minus G3, it gives what? You can nullify the effect of pretest, right? Similarly, in the control group, you can, by subtracting G4 and G2, you can nullify the effect of pretest in control groups. You can nullify the effect of pretest in experimental groups. So if you find the difference between these two groups, and if this difference is significant, then we say that this is because of experimentation or experimental treatment that is provided to the experimental group. Okay, so if you look at the designs, first one, second one, third one, fourth one, the researchers try to nullify the effect of extraneous variables gradually to some extent. Okay, second one is better than first one, third one is better than second one, like that. So Solomon core group method is far better than all the previous three designs, because there is more scope for nullifying, minimizing the effect of extraneous or intervening variables. Coming to quasi-experimental designs. What is the main limitation of quasi-experimental designs? Main limitation in quasi-experimental designs? In all the four designs, we have discussed about, here till now, 4 designs. In all the designs, we have mentioned an important characteristic of experimental research, that is randomization. Whereas in quasi-experimental designs,
There is no
that is,
randomization.
that is big limitation of quasi-experimental designs. Then should we adopt quasi-experimental designs? Because there is no randomization, there is no, definitely there will be influence of extraneous variables or intervening variables on the dependent variable. It is not that easy to find out the exact relationship between dependent and independent variables, cause and effect relationship. Then why should we go for quasi-experimental designs? There should be some reason, no? Why should we go for quasi-experimental designs? Am I clear? See, in pure experimental designs, we have discussed about how to improve the design, experimental design, so that we'll arrive at valid conclusions with regard to relationship between cause and effect or dependent and independent variables. Coming to the quasi-experimental designs, we are stating that randomization, lack of randomization is a great limitation of the designs. Then why should we go for quasi-experimental designs? As we have discussed in the morning session, in the field of education, it is not possible for us to go for pure research. So most of the research in the field of education is of applied nature, in spite of its limitations. Similarly, we are not dealing with other living beings like rats or something else to conduct our research in controlled conditions, applying randomization, right? After all, we are dealing with human beings. Therefore, in the field of education, we can go for quasi-experimental research only in most of the cases, right? So what are the designs that we use? Most of the research, majority of the cases, experimental studies, they'll apply this. Very simple test. No need to go for, okay. So first one is pre-test. Pre-test.
Pre-test only randomized.
Randomized this. Pre-test, post-test, randomized design, right? See, as in the case of pure research, experimental group, take control group, provide experimentation, treatment, no treatment, conduct post-test, compare it to the previous design and this design is, we cannot allocate the subjects to experimental control groups using randomization technique, right? We can't go for randomization. Then, how to nullify? See, we may not be able to apply randomization, but we should see some way or other we are trying to nullify the effect of extraneous variables. How can we do that? Researchers suggest a best technique. What is that? Try to select the samples from the population. To give a best example, select huge classrooms, very big classrooms. That, because in a single classroom, almost majority of the characteristics will be same. So from that, select the subjects for control group and the experimental group. Unlike this, if you select, suppose A section for experimental group and C section for control group, definitely you will get contradictory results, because we select creamy students there to the A section and maybe below average students will be placed in C section. Basically there is some difference between these two students. So whatever the difference that is observed among the groups, between the groups, cannot be claimed that maybe because of your experimentation. So therefore, one of the best techniques given by the educationist researchers is prefer population for selection of the samples. And for selection of control and experimental groups, always prefer huge classrooms where the students are having similar characteristics and divide the students to both experimental and control groups. This is how, and the remaining things are same. So coming to rotation group design. What is this rotation group design? If the researcher is interested to find out the effect of a particular teaching method, he has selected two teaching methods to see the effect of teaching methods. Selected two groups. Methods are two, groups are two. But the teacher is different. For group 1, the teacher who teaches the students is different, and for group 2, the teacher is different. Don't you think that this is a big extraneous variable? Isn't it? Is it not the extraneous variable influencing your results? One teacher is very good, the other teacher is not so good. Definitely that affects the performance of the students, learning of the students. So, to nullify that, not nullify, to balance that effect, both the groups will be, teacher will be rotated and the group also will be, method also will be rotated. How will be this design, tell me? Method 1, method 2. Contents, unit 1, unit 2. Group 1, experimental group, right? Not group 1, this is experimental group. This is control group. For first unit, for experimental group, in the first round, we give unit 1. This is control group. For the control group, we give unit 2. Right? In the second case, okay, now this is control group, this is experimental group. We have rotated the groups. That is why it is called rotation group design. If you take experimental group, they are exposed to unit 1, they are exposed to unit 2. If you take control group, they are exposed to both unit 1 and unit 2. Unit 1, unit 2 means the groups are changed, also automatically the teachers also change. So almost similar conditions are guaranteed to both the experimental and control groups. That's why we try to minimize the effect of extraneous variables to some extent. Okay, unlike the designs in the case of pure experimental designs. Right? So this is about rotation, group, design. So these are the. Yeah, of course, there are other designs also. It is not given in, not there in the syllabus.
But here unit change, unit 1, unit 2 units are must.
Yes, sir. Yes, because
Here exchange can be done only by teacher.
no, units also should be rotated. Why units also should be rotated? One component may be easy, other part of the unit may be difficult. Okay, for one group of students that part may be easy. For other group of students this part may be easy. So if you rotate the content also, in terms of content also, both the groups will be provided with similar knowledge, right? So this is what is called rotation group technique or rotation group design. So there is crude experimental design also. Crude experimental designs means there won't be control group. They just take a single group, apply pretest to that group. After giving some treatment for a period of 1 month or 2 months, apply post-test to the same group, and they test the difference between pre-test and post-test. If the difference between pre-test and post-test is significant, they say that whatever the difference that is observed is because of this experimentation. Is it true? Is it true?
Yes.
No. That difference may be because of pre-test. We have already discussed. Okay? Due to pre-test also there will be some improvement in the dependent variable. Due to general growth and development during this experimental period, there will be some improvement in the dependent variable. So therefore, crude experimental designs are not advised to see the cause and effect relationship between the variables. Right? In pure researches, pure sciences, they use pure experimental designs. In applied fields like education, psychology, we go for quasi-experimental designs. Under unavoidable circumstances, people will be using crude experimental designs. Not able to go for some control, they cannot go for 2 groups and all, due to some limitations which they use. But usually, the researchers will not accept it. Any queries? Any queries, please? Okay. Any queries, please?
Actually, in the Solomon group, you said no. The first experiment one with pre-test and post-test.
Yes.
The control for the experiment one, group 1, group 2. For the experimental group and control. And for the second one, without pre-test, only post-test. Okay. Down to this. First one is randomized. The very first one is randomized. Control group, experiment. There you will select the subjects randomly. The second one, you don't randomize, you will select as matched. The second one is matched, not randomized. When you come to the third one, again it is randomized. Then there again if you select a matched group, then it is growth. Then again you are nullifying the errors. That's good. The third one, why you are selecting a random subjects? The first one you told, for the group, you select the subjects randomly.
What is the design you are talking about?
First one.
Control group,
Yeah, two experimental design. In the two experimental design, the first one you said, for the both experimental and the control, you select the subject randomly.
Yes.
For the second design, you select matched.
Yes.
Or when we come to third design, still more improvement needed. But what we did is again we are going to randomize. Why?
What is the design?
The design is pre-test, post-test, randomized group design.
What is the second design?
That is okay. There you don't have the pre-test. But here again, why we should have that randomized one? Still purify we can do. No, the match design we can do.
Of course. If it is possible, we can go for matched designs. No,
No, we are purifying every step. We are purifying. We are nullifying the errors.
To improve better, we have included pre-test.
Yeah, that is
In the
okay.
previous case, there is
So
no
can we
pre-test.
add one more that pre-test, post-test, matched group design?
Yes.
So when one randomized and one more matched also, 5, then again it comes to Solomon.
Yes.
Okay, is it okay then?
Solomon includes all these designs.
Yes, Solomon, you get the 2 different.
Okay, he tries to nullify all sorts of the influences of extraneous variables by including pre-test, by including randomization of allocation of subjects to the groups, by including having both experimental and control groups. These are all the steps taken by Solomon.
Yes. Okay, that's why I had the doubt that we are nullifying everything. First 2 designs we nullified, and again why we should take the randomized.
So, this is how we should try to select the groups. We should have to select a suitable design while planning our experimental research. Okay, so most important thing is taking care of extraneous variables.
Is there a standard for this design only for this one should take? Is there a standard?
It depends on the variables that you are.
No, this test should have this design only. Is there any standardization for that?
No, it depends on the variable that you are testing. The cause and effect relationship, it depends on your hypothesis, right? So your design decides your validity of the results, right?
So how, which type of design? Any example for all these? Simple examples, so children can understand that this design, such designs will be used in such. If my cause and effect is like this design is suitable.
So the previous resource person, she has mentioned a topic on the board.
Yes.
What is
ICT
it?
usage in that.
What is the topic?
Effect of ICT in Sanskrit learning.
Effect of ICT in the
Sanskrit teaching.
learning of language, maybe Sanskrit language,
Sanskrit.
right? What is the independent variable? What is the dependent variable here?
ICT is independent.
ICT is independent. What is dependent variable?
So learning achievement.
Academic achievement of students is Sanskrit learning, right? Among all the designs that we have discussed till now, which one is most suitable one here in this case? Better to have experimental group and control group. Better to have both pre-test and post-test, right? If all your resources permit, if your resources are also very, very important. If your time permits, if the in the field work, if you have that freedom to have experiment to go for experimentation for a longer period, having number of groups, then it is always better to go for Solomon 4 group design. But I don't think the school administration give you that much of time to conduct experimentation, because you are increasing more number of groups means your work also will be laborious, right? So therefore, in this case, pre-test, post-test, randomized group design is there, no? That you can go for, because matching is not possible. Randomized group design you can apply. It is pure research design I have mentioned.
What about quasi? It's the final one. Quasi.
Because it is only, you are testing only the effect of ICT. But if you take 2 methods, it is better to go for rotation group design. If you are seeing now testing the effect of both ICT and program instruction, suppose, which is better, right? Then you should go for rotation group design. Likewise, depending upon quasi. Rotation group design is quasi experimental design.
Thank you.
Thank you.
ओम गुरु ब्रह्मा गुरु विष्णु गुरुदेव महेश्वरः गुरु साक्षात् परं ब्रह्म तस्मै श्री गुरवे नमः। नमस्सभायै सर्वेभ्यः नमो नमः। अद्य पंचम दिवसः अस्माकं कार्यशालायां प्रथमसत्रे एवं च चतुर्थसत्रे सुदूर द्रविडियन यूनिवर्सिटी कुप्पम आंध्र प्रदेशतः प्रोफेसर आर यशोदा महोदयाः आगतवत्यः। महोदयाः अस्माकं कृते एक्सपेरिमेंटल मेथड विषये मीनिंग ऑफ एक्सपेरिमेंटल मेथड, डेफिनेशन ऑफ एक्सपेरिमेंटल मेथड, assumption of experimental method and types of group experimental method and rotation group experimental method कथं करणीयम् एतस्मिन् विषये सुचारुरूपेण मार्गदर्शनं कृतवत्यः। एताभ्यः महोदयाभ्यः विश्वविद्यालयपक्षतः, विभागपक्षतः, कार्यशालापक्षतः हार्दान् धन्यवादान् विदधामि। एवमेव अस्याः कार्यशालायाः निर्देशकेभ्यः, संयोजकेभ्यः, सहसंयोजकेभ्यः एवं उपस्थितेभ्यः सर्वेभ्यः भूय धन्यवादान् विदधामि। नमो नमः।